Can you hear me? Good. Okay, thank you, Tanguy, for the introduction. I don't know what you said, but I hope that it's nice. And I also want to thank Alan for the invitation to come here, and thank you to all the Corridor team for hosting me and putting on this very nice event. And thank you all for coming as well. So when Alan asked me to do this talk, he said to propose these obsessions, 3 obsessions, which influence my work. And I have used this a bit to structure the presentation. So the first obsession is proportion. And I'm going to talk about a house which gets its architecture almost only from its proportions, I would argue. Then I will talk about marble, an obsession with marble, and for that I will talk about a project which I talk of as a separate project, but it's actually the bathroom which is inside this house. And I began that project when I found some nice marble. And then the third obsession is with driveways, and I would hope to talk about this utopian idea for a city which is based on driveways. So let's start. Okay, I will start with the site plan, the context of this project, of this house. But I really just want to start with the site plan to dismiss it and say that the location has almost nothing to do with the house itself. I mean, I can mention perhaps that it's a typical Australian suburb of bungalow-style houses, of which this project is the one in the middle in black. Perhaps it's interesting also to note that there's a caravan park to the south, to the lower portion of the plan, where you can see these little, much smaller size dwellings, and that's where people come to go on holiday. And in some ways, the proportion of the house, or let's say the urban footprint of the house, is more in a way like those little cabins. But to me, the specific site is not the context of the project. This is the context to me. This is the kind of manner of building which is typical for this part of Australia. And it's a very simple kind of house. It's made from timber frame structure. The roof is, an ordinary gable roof, and then they always will paint the gutters a certain colour. That's kind of like the only eccentric moment, you could say. The walls are made from fibre cement sheeting, which is a very low-cost, cheap, easy to construct material you can do by yourself almost. And then the plinth that the house sits on is just timber frame, and then here they've sort of boxed it in. So it's not on a basement; it's just columns on the ground. So you can see these 2 wooden gates for the house. The big one is for the car, and the small one is for the lawnmower, which then comes out every weekend to maintain the grass. This kind of house, even though it's quite banal and ordinary, it has the associations for many people as reminding them of holidays. So there's a lot of happy memories associated with this kind of building. I think maybe, I'm not sure, it's a bit like a Swiss cabin, where it's this kind of vernacular that has some kind of nostalgia for us. And so then this is the house that I did. And I want to show that it's actually very much built in the same manner. It's not so different. Maybe the gable roof, the pitched roof, I have done very, very at an angle of 15 degrees, so that you almost don't see it. And in this perspective, you actually don't see the roof. The walls are again made from this fibre cement sheeting, which is I use to sort of create a rhythm. And then here also the plinth of the house is just a table of timber stumps. And then this was left open so that the idea is that the garden can sort of grow through the house, a little bit under the house as well. And the reason why I wanted to build it in such a simple way was, number one, for the money, but also because I want to convince myself, and maybe even you, that proportions is the fundamental, or in a way, all you need to create architecture. But to start with this, to start talking about proportions, we have to look from the other side of this wall, from the inside of the house looking out, where the context just becomes now a sort of framed picture, maybe even a David Hockney picture, and the interior space becomes the architecture. And then stepping back even further into the middle of the house, this context has now completely disappeared. And what you see now, hopefully, is some kind of interior landscape where the relationship from door to door and from door to other door or from room to room, this is where the project gets its meaning. So I started to think about this kind of interest in proportions when I was working for Office Kessingeer's David van Severen, and I would watch what we would do at work, which was in some simple way just make things square or find some kind of geometry and force it into a site and make it work. And I wanted to learn to look and see things like they saw them. So when I would get home in the evening, I would then, well, I had no projects or anything like that, so I would just look for a context, which was for me just finding an image, say on Google image search, and then simply by using Photoshop, cropping it and using the free transform tools like you would do a collage to kind of give some meaning to the image. So I would do at work I would do at home what we did at work, and it was kind of like a relaxing way to unwind, you could say. But what this hobby taught me was just to look at one image for an entire evening, which is quite, a different thing to do. I mean, if you think about the way we consume images now through Instagram, this was like quite a disciplined, although very simple, but quite a disciplined, forced viewing. And you would look at the image and then try and to project onto it some kind of order. And this hobby changed the way that I looked at things in general. So, and then also reading Colin Rowe was a big influence on me, because Colin Rowe saw modernism and classicism as just simply different languages that you could freely use. And it's not that they were the product of any kind of social, political context. They were just, let's say, different vocabularies. And if you think about things in that way, then you can think of history in a much more sort of horizontal way, where more morphological, where you can pick and take things from different moments in time, and it kind of all depends from where you start from. So, for example, this Palladian villa can become the Bauhaus with some simple, it's just missing the portico to come loose and a void to be taken out of it. So these were the ideas that were in my mind when I started work on the house. So that is, start with proportion and force a proportion, and that you can think of history in this kind of indiscriminate way. This was an early sketch that I made, which was just simply 3 pavilions separated by 2 spaces, which could have 2 different conditions. And then the service spaces, or the sort of secondary spaces, would be just stuck on either end. And I think what this emphasizes is that the interior condition is much more important than how the building looks from the outside. A second sketch shows a kind of Palladian villa like rhythm of big rooms and small rooms, The only furniture is these two beds on opposite ends of the house. And then to this kind of Palladian order, there has been some erasures, some cutouts. So maybe some rooms become patios, other rooms lose their walls and become loggia. And then another sketch was now trying to make this middle room the same size as the in-between rooms, let's say, and that the end rooms or end pavilions would just be more narrow, kind of bookending the space. So in this sketch, then you see the three middle rooms as kind of one big room, and then also I added a front and a back. So here's the plan, and then I think I tried to synthesize the ideas from these three sketches into this plan, taking a little bit of each. So I hope that you can still read it's clearly three separate pavilions, and yet the whole thing is based on one order, one grid, which has a rhythm that, if you look from the bottom, goes A, B, 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 A, and then going up the page goes A, B, A. And then to this order, there has been some sort of erasure where maybe the floor drops out to make a patio, some walls come out to make a portico or a hall, an open hall, and maybe the structure then completely disappears in the bottom left-hand corner and you're just left with a pergola. And then the third sketch, the kind of way of sort of synthesizing the middle rooms together. But number one, they're all three equal in size, even though they have different climatic conditions. And they all have the same set of doors, which then allows you from within the space to sort of look through them in this kind of enfilade. And then the section, again, you can see the three pavilions. The hall, which is this kind of room that has a slight arched vault to it, that I wanted to make a little bit special, like it's the entry point. So I gave it a nicer ceiling, which we can see later in the pictures. But you can see in this section, it's a little bit off balance because the room or the pavilion on the left, which is, the left, is the bedroom for the hosts, the people whose house it is, and the middle hall, there's a kind of tight connection there because of the continuous roof. And then the guest wing, that's a bit lost in this drawing or in this space. It looks a little bit detached. So then in the elevation or in the facade, then this guest wing and the middle hall are tied together more tightly with a veranda, and then and also the facades, which are made of these three squares of fibre cement sheet. The central hall square is then inflected a little bit closer to the guest wing to make a little bit of a tighter connection. So while I was designing this project, I was also teaching, and we were doing a studio on facades. And this is a model some students made of Cardoro, and it was very interesting when we were looking at this facade to realize how, the facade is mainly made of two halves, this kind of open arches and this more closed half. But if you look in the middle bandage, there is this set of windows, of which there is one anomaly window, which the students and we all became fascinated with. And so that's in the middle row, this window that's slightly smaller and slightly squashed than its neighbours. And we thought that, what is the purpose of this? And we came to this conclusion that perhaps you make that window a little bit smaller so that you can somehow discount it visually. And then it allows you to read the other three windows as a kind of set. And in fact, they're equally spaced now. So even as the facade is getting more and more articulated, it's getting more and more divided. But then you have this one moment where you then stitch the three back together and you make this kind of unity. So I wanted to try and do a similar trick. And here I then proposed to paint these doors. I mean, they're not really doors, they're kind of painted panels. They are what I would say is notational doors. And so you can see that starting from the left, this door is slightly inflected this way, and then the next one, the door is slightly inflected in the other direction, and then the final door is then inflected back like the first, that way. And what that creates is this kind of, these three white painted panels are then equally spaced from each other, and that I would say then helps stitch the facade back together. So this was quite an interesting and long process that was quite drawn out of thinking about how to look at things. But then it came the reality of building the project, and that was more, let's say, complicated. And I used this chair as a kind of way to explain to myself the process of building and the frustration that that happens with it. So I once made this chair which has a kind of very minimal expression. It's like, what are the smallest elements you need to make something read like a chair? But once I made this chair and had it, nobody wanted to sit on it. It was quite uncomfortable, and then so my friend put a cushion on it as a way to try and entice people to then sit on this chair. And then, this cushion somehow completes the chair. It gives the chair a context, and also this old cushion gets some kind of dignity as well, because it's being displayed on this very kind of precise structure like a latrine, and so the cushion becomes like an archaeological artifact. And so I learned from this that actually this frustration or this kind of compromise that happens along the way is much more interesting than my own desire to try and make something very, dry and abstract. This is also a lesson that I learned from Kirsten Gears and David Van Severen. With this first project I worked on for them, it was quite interesting to me that they came up with this plan. It's a house, a villa that was never built, but the plan on the left they came up with very, very quickly. It was a set of 24 identical rooms that go into the ground, and all the openings are the same, and they even sync up on the corners. That bit came to them very quickly, but it was weeks until they came to added the final room, the 25th room, which is this one on the top here. And this process was the much more complex process for them. And it was like they weren't satisfied that the project was completed until they had contradicted their own self-imposed order. So when I began the project, I thought, okay, I need to also create these limitations on myself. What is going to be the piece which is very controlled, and which is the bits that I can let go? So in this first model of the house, I said, okay, the architecture is just in the middle section, just the piano nobile. Everything below can be just typical way that the builder would do it, and everything above the roof can just be the typical gable roof also. But I was convinced that in order for this to work, when you were inside the space, you couldn't be aware of these banal moments. You couldn't see the roof from the inside. It had to be quite invisible. So then I made the pitch of the roof very shallow, so you wouldn't see it. But then, of course, in this kind of climate, there's a lot of rain and there's also a lot of sun. So it's actually quite useful to have eaves, which overhang a bit and shelter the building. So I thought, okay, I can make these eaves kind of like integrated into the facade if they control the dimension very precisely. In here, it's in this second model at a scale of 1 to 50 now, it's 40 centimeters. I said, okay, this will be all right. A 40 centimeter soffit, and then you can sort of decorate it with some lines. Like Michelangelo would do in the Palazzo Farnese, where he makes this really big cornice to sort of complete the building. Here you can see it under construction before any of this has started, and it's just a pure abstract space. But then as it became to be built, we needed even bigger eaves. So this time 90 centimeters, and I thought, no, this is not going to work. So I said, okay, the architecture stops at 40 centimeters, and then the roof continues on for the rest. So there was this kind of interesting standoff between the architecture and the building itself, and making this like clear division. But then actually, as I saw it be constructed and I saw it come up, I realized, these rafters that overhang, they are actually, this is the origin of where cornices come from. I had no idea. And it was a kind of like profound moment for me where again, the building somehow does a better job than what you would do. So then once I saw them, I thought, okay, this is quite a nice thing. I'm going to treat it very seriously. I spent a lot of time trying to define the perfect color, because like in these vernacular houses, they care a lot about the color that runs around the gutter. And it was interesting also to realize that that half of the cornice, or the rafters, are always in shadow, and the other half is always facing the sun. So even when you try and paint in the same color, it has this kind of, you really can tell that it's not a cornice but a kind of overhang. So in the end, I used these two colors, which are very different. The sort of darker color you can see on these paint swatches, and then the brighter, more intense turquoise color. And actually those two colors together is what is in this picture. The bright turquoise color sits underneath, and the dark, dull color sits on the side facing the sun. And I hope together the two melt together and look like one color. And it also has the kind of effect of lifting up this rafter. So these kind of details I did a lot myself, and could spend a lot of time, insane amounts of time doing this stuff. And here you can see painting, I think there was like maybe 5 colors or 5 different materials up here with me while I was doing this. Behind me, there is no longer a shadow line. In front of me, you can see the shadow line of where the pilaster and the beam sit. So all these kind of details which you cannot afford a builder to do, I was doing. I mean, it was in a way, because I don't know how to build, but I know how to make models. I was treating this building like it was a gigantic model. And another problem with downpipes, with the rainwater downpipe, another problem with eaves, so this big expression of the top of the building, is it's very hard to make the rainwater downpipe. And this I was thinking about for a long time. At one point, I had found a palm husk, which when I would walk to the site in the mornings through a bush or through some forest, I could see there was these palm trees, and they would drop these husks, and the husk had a very beautiful form, this kind of slight curve, and I just had it there on the site as something nice to look at. And then at a certain point, we realized I could use it to make the form of the downpipe. So these rainwater downpipes are made from plastic PVC pipe, very cheap. And then you take hot water from a kettle, and you pour it, you block the ends and you pour it in, and then the hot water makes the plastic melt a bit, and then the pipe becomes kind of limp. You can move it a bit like this. So when it becomes warm, you can frame up the shape that you want and hold it in place with some screws. And then as the water cools and the plastic cools also, and it keeps this form. And to me now, this picture, it looks kind of like the stem of a flower. So those kinds of details are, let's say, improvisational details that you can do when you are thinking about things and you have a bit of time. Other details like this one, this is what I would think of more of an architectural detail. It has to be there from the beginning. So this particular corner, this, for example, these lines, they all extend to all four corners of the building. The beam on the left is structural. It's supporting the roof, and the beam on the right is, let's say, architectural. It's not doing anything. And the ceiling also just then slightly lifted up a bit to make this beam come alive. Some other details like the handrail and the stairs. I thought these, which are not necessarily architectural details, they're more like bits you add on functionally because you need them. And then these things should have the same decorum as the rest of the house. They should have this kind of typical building construction. It shouldn't be something flashy like a piece of nice designer furniture. It should be something that seems like it could be anywhere. The stairs are turned on a slight angle so that they can go both to the hall and also both to the veranda. Also, these curtains in the background, they're also kind of added afterwards. And one thing that's quite interesting in the house is these birds are flying always through these voids very quickly. And it was quite strange, so I Googled it, and I learnt that birds, because they have their eyes like this on the side of their head, they can navigate very well when they're flying between parallel walls. So when you make all your doors the same on both sides, the birds, they really love it. So to kind of sum up this house, it's not a particularly functional house. I mean, it works, I hope. But the point of it is not so much the functions, but the rituals that come from this kind of rigorously proportioned plan. Because the plan is balanced, then the life style is somehow balanced as well. The guests on one side and the hosts on the other, they live kind of almost separate lives, and then they meet together in the center when it's time to eat. And then they, at the end of the meal, then they depart in opposite directions, and it makes a kind of ceremony to these normal living situations. Also, you need to go then outside in order to go back inside to the bedroom. And this is also quite an interesting pattern interruption, because often I think we live our lives in this sort of automatic way where we are living, well, we are, let's say, waking up, eating, going to work, coming home, eating again, then sleeping. And these rituals that we do them almost automatically without questioning them. They're habits. But then if you have these little moments of interruption where you have to then go outside and suddenly you're a bit cold, or the wind is blowing, or even it's just nice out there, these somehow intervene into these daily rituals and make you somehow more aware of not the house, but just the context that you're living in. And to me, this kind of very elemental architectural moves, going inside, going outside, they're so simple that even the dog can understand them. So now these other two projects, they're much simpler, but much quicker. This one, this is the bathroom for the house, which kind of exists inside the house like bacteria inside the gut. It's a kind of totally different organism. And that's because I approached it with almost the reverse method. When I was doing this house, it's quite, because I was trying to make it very about proportions and that the building language could be very typical, I had a certain moment of crisis where I thought, a certain self-doubt where I'm like, is this really enough? Is this, going to be convincing? And so in this moment of let's say, doubt, I remember this collage of Rem Koolhaas, and how this one moment of marble in this park of allotments, it somehow makes all the austerity, all the dryness palatable. So with this moment of opulence, I felt like I could then, for the rest of the project, be very restrained and very dry. But then first I had to find some marble, some very psychedelic, intense marble, like this Koolhaas kind. And I began searching, and I eventually found some, but it was 12 hours drive away, or 1,200 kilometers. And this is me at the end of this journey after collecting the marble. And for me, this picture captures a moment of pure triumph. Even though the bathroom hadn't even started, I was convinced now it was going to be okay. But of course, when you buy this marble like in this way, you have no control over the size or the shape or even the amount. And so then you have to make the design suit the material that you have, starting from the ground and then trying to build up into a whole. So the plan that I thought of on the drive back, actually, was to make it seem like I had even more marble. And I thought that if you take the offcuts, the small pieces that I got, and wrap them around the perimeter and have the big pieces on one side, you get the impression that it's this complete marble floor, of which the real floor is then just a sort of a rug that sits on there. Also, I couldn't easily cut the marble, and there were some corners which were broken as well. So because it was used marble, so in order to do that, in order to resolve that, there was this detail that was of just layering a material in front of the marble. So this is the timber walls, which are in the interior of the house, and so they sit in front of the marble so that they can then take on the form that you would want the marble to take. It also means that you can then hide these broken pieces because they can sit up behind the wall. And it kind of looks to me a little bit like this fleshy animal-like marble is then just sort of wrapped in a kind of lacy cloth. I also couldn't lift the marble as well. So I had to think then of a way to do the upper part of the shower, of the bathroom. Something that could balance this marble, something that could be as strong as this kind of psychedelic crazy marble. And here is a coloured paint swatch, the kind when you go to the hardware store and you can pick the colours, they give you a little square. So I found the right kind of square and put it on there, and it kind of worked as the shape. The palette card, they're called. And then here is it built. What you see is what's just simply been added since the model is the shower head and the taps, which are kind of like a figurative element, like a sort of person or an alien or something that is on this yellow wall, and then two small shelves that frame this figurative element that are then made to sort of as extrusions out of this yellow square. I kind of thought of this yellow square as one big tile, because also I couldn't tile. So then I thought, well, if you can't tile nicely, maybe just make one really big tile and put it there. So the shelves come out like this kind of extrusion, and that in that way they don't cast a shadow. They're more softer. Also, when you see these three pieces of marble, when you want to, of course, lay them in the bookend way, where they make this lines of symmetry. But when you only have three sheets left, then you get this kind of weird zigzag figure, which is not quite. It's a sort of incomplete symmetry. And this motif, this zigzag motif, I then used in the shower tray, which you can see a little bit. There's that black square, which that is then tiled and has a more slope for the water to run off. So approaching the rest of the bathroom in a similar way, it's like it's more like an assemblage where you find the ingredients you need first, and then you bring them to the room, and you place them where they need to go, and you then try and create some kind of relationships as you're doing it, and you try and discover new relationships. So in this here, you can see the toilet seat was then used as a sort of placeholder to kind of balance the set of toilet and the basin. There is a sort of semicircle, or an oval shape in the basin, and of course the oval shape of the toilet, and then you kind of want another oval to complete the composition. And then in the end that became a picture of a waterfall that is nearby. And for me it was kind of appropriate that you have this picture of a waterfall when you can look at it when you're using the toilet. But also what was quite interesting is that when you look at the bathroom ingredients, the parts of a bathroom, they have their own anatomy. They're kind of like figurative elements. So a toilet is not just this product that you buy and put it in there. It's actually made of, let's say, 4 big elements. And if you treat each one of these elements separately, you can think of them in a more compositional way. And they somehow get an anthropomorphic feel to them. I think basins, they swallow water in the same way that our own intestines do. And these kind of associations, I mean, they're not really the point of what I was interested in, but these associations just come to you when you put things in a space and you give them enough breathing space and you allow them to be naturally. So the final part of the talk, this third obsession of driveways, I'm going to return, I have returned again to this image of the context to describe now this kind of utopian project. But this time, instead of looking at the building itself, I want to talk and introduce the surroundings a little bit of this building. It's a building that is surrounded by 3 neighbours. The 2 that you see in the picture in the background, they are separated by a fence, but the neighbour that you don't see, the one on the right side, there is no fence, and you can just see in the picture simply a driveway that runs through the property. And then there's also quite a lot of grass. That's why they need this door for the lawnmower, so they can come out and maintain the grass. And I noticed that that the grass kind of grows a little bit over the driveway, and there's this kind of ambiguity of where one property starts and where the next begins. And I was thinking about grass as being, it's not the nicest garden that you see. I mean, it's good for playing games on, but I was thinking, why is grass so popular? And perhaps it has something to do with the fact that it requires so much maintenance, regular maintenance, then you are kind of signaling to your neighbors that you are reliable. This is like you can tell that you have your house in order if your grass is neatly trimmed. And so I was thinking about this a bit more and more, and I drew a plan of this little thing that I took the picture of. So you can see in the center the building, and you can see the neighbors. These buildings on the left-hand side and the top of the plan, they're more new buildings. And when you have to build in this way, the house becomes a kind of object that is then defined by the wall of the fence. But if you build in the other way, which is how this central building and the building to the right of it is, with no fence, then the house itself defines the border, between one place and the next. And what that means, I think, is that you, even though you have a certain proportion of the property that is rightfully yours, you don't take it all. You only occupy less than what you can by right, but you also then maybe give more in that you with your lawnmower, you mow the lawn of your neighbor a bit because you're doing it already. And I think what this creates is something when you give more and you take less, it's a sort of civic politeness. So I was wondering like how that could work at a larger scale. How do you allow people the opportunity to demonstrate politeness? Just by coincidence, last night I was in Flins and I was staying in a Rudolf Olgiati house, and I learnt that he owned, or his family owned, this land where he built a lot, and so he put the buildings where they should go rather than where he thought they should go, and then the property lines came later, and it's quite interesting. So the red line is the line of the road that is, let's say, the municipal road, and then this road that continues further is really a kind of driveway that is shared by these 1, 2, 3 houses, and on the property of 4 different houses. So any changes to this driveway then don't have to be done through the municipal council, but they have to be done in consensus or a negotiation with your neighbours. So I was wondering, like, could you make this kind of road of which is completely composed of only driveways which meet at certain points? They're all completely independently owned and maintained, but they are freely used by everybody. Now, maybe one problem with this kind of system is what happens when you have a bad neighbour. Just as you sometimes see the neighbour on the street who doesn't maintain his grass, who lets it grow a bit, maybe there's also the same neighbour who doesn't take care of his driveway, and then, you know, the whole system fails. So one possible solution to this bad neighbour problem is to introduce alternative routes. So as you come to the next house, there's always 2 options, like a kind of fork in the road, and so you always have 2 choices. And that makes this kind of network that is something like a torrent file, if you know how that works. And so when you download things from a torrent file, you're downloading a little bit here, a little bit there, and if this person then goes offline, you can still get fragments from other people. So in a network like this, it can fail, and it can in fact fail in many parts, but never fail completely. It's kind of interesting also that it's more of a system than an architectural project, and in that way then it looks somehow more natural. And then I wonder also what would be the kind of appropriate building typology that would suit this kind of system. This is a picture of a French farmhouse. And this, I think, is quite an interesting typology because it works as both at the small scale of, say, a single family house, but it also works at a much larger agglomeration where maybe there would be multiple small houses living together. And the courtyard typology in this scenario, which is open, it means that the public space then becomes somehow a kind of interior condition where the house is hosting the cars that travel through it, kind of like guests. And here's this same French farmhouse typology. It feels a little bit like a city, you know. It has a civic scale to it, and perhaps then these houses can be autonomous sovereignties. They can make their own rules, like the councils can, and in this way it's then something between a large house but also maybe a small city. So these autonomous sovereignties, these farmhouses, are in a way completely independent, but at the same time they are reliant on this network of shared driveways for transit and maybe for supply of services, water, etc. So you have this kind of maximum autonomy at a certain scale, but then you also have completely independent, completely dependent interconnectedness, which I think promotes reciprocity at the larger scale. Zooming out a bit, at certain points, these driveways, then they link up and they form kind of necklaces that define the limits of this kind of common land. So each sovereignty then would have, each house is adjacent to more than one common land. So you can, in a way, still have the freedom to choose where you might want to invest your resources. So let's say you're part of a loop of 5 houses that make one common land. Maybe it makes sense to build a small workshop there. Maybe you're also in another loop of, say, 10. And in that scenario, maybe it makes sense to build some kind of school. And then where these driveways meet each other, there are these gates which stay open typically. But then if there's a dispute between neighbours, then the gate will close. And if you're not a particularly agreeable person and you have all your gates closed with your neighbours, then you're in a way completely isolated. Your driveways are blocked and you're in a way no longer part of the community. So to return again finally to this slide, I think that each of these 3 projects come from different obsessions, as Alan proposed, and I'm not sure if there is necessarily a clear relationship between them all, but they all, I think, have a different relationship to the house or to the home. One is that the first house is the home. The house is an architectural subject. I mean, Palladio showed us this. It's not just public buildings. And then, what are the limits of what a house can be? The bathroom, is the bathroom part of the house's architecture, or is it its own thing? And then finally, can the house or can a series of houses be somehow the starting point or the infrastructure itself of a small village or even city? Thank you very much.